If you're using Minoxidil to grow your hair, you're probably dealing with unwanted hair growth on your body. If you're dealing with Finasteride, you're probably aware of concerns around reduced libido and erectile dysfunction. And if you're using dutasteride, you're making a conscious trade-off between greater effectiveness and concerns around sexual function. All of these popular hair loss treatments come with trade-off, and that's what makes hair loss so frustrating. Because for decades, it felt like if you wanted to regrow your hair, these were the trade-offs you just had to accept. But what if there was another option? One that has been clinically studied and researched for decades and has received FDA clearance and doesn't rely on minoxidil, finasteride, or dutasteride and approaches hair growth through a completely different biological pathway. Hi, I'm Bobby Spence. I'm a certified trichologist and a hair loss expert, and over the past 20 years, I've helped thousands of patients improve their hair growth and their hair density. So let me start with the basics. Hair loss, particularly androgenetic alopecia, happens when a hormone called DHT binds to your hair follicles and slowly miniaturizes them. Over time, these follicles produce thinner, weaker strands until eventually they stop producing hair altogether. Now, it can be treated with essentially two categories of FDA-approved approaches. The first works by blocking DHT, finasteride, and dutasteride. The second works by stimulating blood flow and prolonging the growth phase, which is minoxidil. And both of these approaches come with trade-offs that many people aren't willing to accept, which raises the question, is there another way? It turns out there is. And it doesn't involve hormones, pills, or topicals at all. One of the landmark studies in the field was published by Jimenez and colleagues. Researchers looked at men with androgenetic alopecia and randomized them into two groups. One group received active laser treatments. The other received a sham device that looked identical but delivered no therapeutic laser energy. At the end of the study, the active treatment group experienced statistically significant improvement in terminal hair density compared with the placebo group. Once researchers established that laser therapy could influence hair growth, their attention shifted towards understanding the mechanism, and what they discovered was very surprising. The primary target doesn't appear to be the hair itself. It appears to be the mitochondria located inside your follicle cells. One of the leading researchers in this field is Dr. Michael Hamblin, who worked to help establish much of what we know today about photobiomodulation. His research suggested that specific wavelengths of red laser light are absorbed by an enzyme called cytochrome C oxidase inside the mitochondria. That interaction appears to increase ATP production. ATP is essentially cellular energy, and hair follicles require enormous amounts of it. In fact, hair follicles are among the most metabolistic activity structures in the human body. Researchers now believe one of the primary effects of laser phototherapy may be improving the energy available for follicle cells. In simple terms, the laser isn't forcing the hair to grow. It is potentially helping the cells responsible for growth function more effectively. Now, whenever a single study shows positive results, scientists remain cautious. Because one study can be wrong, that's why systemic reviews and meta-analysis also are very important. This allows researchers to pool data from multiple studies and to look for consistent patterns. In 2021, Gupta and colleagues conducted a systemic review and meta-tag analysis examining low-level light therapy for androgenetic alopecia. Instead of evaluating one study, they looked across numerous clinical trials involving both men and women. Their conclusions were remarkably consistent. Low-level light therapy improved hair density, hair count, and overall hair growth outcomes compared to placebo treatment. And perhaps even more importantly, the signal appeared repeatedly across different patient populations and different studies, which naturally raises another question. If the results are real, what's actually driving them? Now, one of the most common explanations you'll hear is that laser therapy works by increasing blood flow to the scalp. And while blood flow may play a critical role, modern research suggests it's only part of the story. A comprehensive review published by AFC and colleagues examines several potential mechanisms involving laser-induced hair growth. Researchers discuss evidence related to nitric oxide release, growth factors, production, stem cell activation, inflammatory pathway modulation, production and cellular signaling changes. And in other words, laser therapy may be influencing multiple biological systems simultaneously. This is important because explaining why researchers now often use them in terms of photobiomodulation. Goal isn't simply to increase circulation, rather is to influence cellular behavior. Hair growth may simply be one downstream consequence of that whole process. Now, here's something fascinating. If you're actually reading through the research papers, you'll notice that scientists spend a surprising amount of time discussing the factors like wavelength, power density, treatment duration, device architecture, and energy delivery. That is because these variables matter a lot, and that's where consumers often make a critical mistake. They assume all light-based hair devices are essentially the same, but the research certainly doesn't treat them that way. In study after study, investigators carefully define the wavelength being used. They carefully define the treatment duration and the energy being delivered. If all the devices were equivalent, these details wouldn't matter, yet they appear repeatedly throughout the scientific papers, which suggests something very important. Quality of light delivery matters, and that brings us to one of the most misunderstood topics in the entire hair growth industry. That is the difference between LLLT and LLPT. Now, most people have heard of the term LLLT, low-level laser therapy. Historically, that's the term researchers use throughout much of the literature. Problem is that over time, the term becomes incredibly broad. Today, devices marketed under LLLT umbrella may use different wavelengths, different power outlets, different treatment geometrics, different laser counts, and in some cases, combinations of lasers and LEDs. And that's where the confusion begins, because saying two devices both use LLLT doesn't necessarily mean they're delivering the same treatment. It's a bit like saying two vehicles are both cars. Technically true, but not particularly useful. This is one of the reasons some manufacturers have started using a more specific term, laser phototherapy, or LPT. The emphasis shifts away from a generic category and towards a therapeutic laser-based photobiomodulation system, which is designed around specific parameters. The objective isn't simply exposing the scalp to light. It's about delivering therapeutic laser energy in a consistent and reproducible way. And this distinction becomes even more important when we start talking about actual light source, because not everything marketed as laser therapy is actually using true lasers. Many products sold online rely heavily on LEDs. Now, LEDs and lasers are both forms of light, but they're not identical technologies. Lasers produce coherent, highly organized light. LEDs produce non-coherent light that disperses much more broadly. Both technologies have applications, but they are fundamentally different. And that's exactly why device design matters far more than most people realize. The research consistently shows that factors like wavelength, energy delivery, treatment consistency, and light source all play an important role in the effectiveness of laser phototherapy. I have personally seen the power of laser phototherapy technology used in Theradome. And over the years, I've seen consistent long-term results in people dealing with diffuse thinning, crown thinning, and androgenetic alopecia. Because ultimately, the goal isn't simply to expose the scalp to light, it's to deliver clinically relevant laser energy in a way that's practical enough for people to stay consistent with long-term usage. If there's one thing to take away from this video, it's that getting results from laser therapy isn't just about using it. It's about using the right technology in the right way. And that's why I put together a video breaking down 10 things no one tells you about laser helmet, but they should, where I cover the biggest myths, the most common misconceptions, and the factors that can make all the difference when it comes to laser hair growth. Watch that video next. It's right here.